Everyone wants to show off their gains from working out, but unless it's summer, it's realistically difficult to flex in thick clothing. However, the forearm muscles are often exposed not only in summer, but also when wearing long sleeves, so well-developed forearms definitely show that you've been working out. Many people believe that compound exercises such as deadlifts or rows are sufficient for their forearms to develop well automatically. However, during these compound exercises, your forearms are not stimulated to the point of failure, nor do they experience a full range of motion. Instead, they merely perform an isometric hold to support the weight. Just as we wouldn't logically consider low-intensity isometric dumbbell holds to be the most optimal exercise for building biceps, it's more beneficial to perform direct forearm exercises rather than solely relying on deadlifts to develop your forearms. Therefore, in this video, I will provide a meticulous and systematic guide, fully backed by scientific evidence, on how you can effectively develop your forearm muscles through direct forearm exercises. First off, the forearm muscles are a complex area made up of 20 different muscles. However, to put it simply, they can be classified into muscles located on the front of the arm and muscles on the back of the arm. Most of the muscles on the front of the arm are responsible for wrist flexion, which means bending your wrist inward. Among these, two muscles are involved not only in wrist flexion but also in finger flexion. Therefore, if you apply strong pressure to your wrist, your fingers may also curl inward along with it. Because they handle wrist flexion and the function of gripping objects with your fingers, these muscles in the front of your arm are used in compound exercises like wrist curls and deadlifts. For your information, these front forearm muscles also handle pronation, which is rotating the wrist inward. It's a muscle that arm wrestlers focus on a lot. Now, if you look at the other side, the muscles on the back of your forearm are responsible for wrist extension, which is bending your wrist the other way. A few of these are also involved in finger extension, so they help you straighten your fingers. This area also includes the supination muscles that rotate the wrist outward, and the well-known brachioradialis is also here. Now let's explore how to effectively exercise each of these muscles. How should we train the muscles located on the front of the forearm? Given that wrist flexion is involved, a wrist curl variation appears to be the most fitting choice. And among the various wrist curl exercises, I think performing them while seated on a bench is more effective than doing them while standing. When you do wrist curls standing, your wrist doesn't bend past a straight line, which limits your range of motion. Your forearm muscles don't get a full stretch. Plus, at the bottom of the movement, when your forearm is most extended, you can see there's no resistance because gravity is pulling parallel to your arm. Overall, this method overemphasizes the contraction phase of the movement. However, if you do the curl with your arm on a bench, your wrist can bend past a straight line, inducing a much greater stretch. This also creates more resistance when the forearm is extended, which theoretically provides a stronger stimulus for muscle growth. If you really want to emphasize the stretch to its absolute maximum, you can use a slight incline. This allows for the maximum load to be applied precisely when your forearm is most fully stretched. Since this is an extreme method, don't do it in isolation. Either combine it with an exercise that emphasizes contraction or perform it alongside general wrist curls to seek variety in your movements. Additionally, movements that force an extreme stretch can often be quite uncomfortable for your joints, therefore you don't necessarily have to exclusively chase that stretch. I believe that simply performing wrist curls while sitting or with your arm resting on a bench is enough. Personally, I prefer barbells to dumbbells. When using dumbbells, the motion can feel a bit unstable, causing them to wobble or the pulling angle to change slightly. However, with a barbell, the movement is more stabilized, making it easier to pull in a straight line and generally perform the exercise. Cables are also a pretty good option. The friction from the cable might slightly reduce the emphasis on the eccentric contraction, but if you attach a proper handle to the cable and perform a wrist curl, it can still be a very effective exercise. However, typically, cables are pulled slightly from above, not vertically down. This results in the resistance being parallel to the arm when the forearm is extended, which means the muscle stretch isn't emphasized. It's a disadvantage similar to the standing wrist curl. However, if you lower the cable height significantly so the resistance pulls vertically downwards, much like a regular curl, I believe you can achieve a similar effect. An important tip here is that when you do a wrist curl, you need to extend it all the way to your fingers. The two largest muscles located in the front of your forearm also play a role in finger flexion. That's what flexor digitorum something or other means. It's involved in finger flexion. Since the two largest muscles are involved in finger flexion, it can be beneficial to let the barbell roll all the way down to your fingertips when lowering it rather than just moving your wrist. For your information, the pronation muscle that turns your wrist inward is located here near the elbow. Interestingly, arm wrestlers who practice this pronation a lot have very large pronator muscles. If you look at the famous Devon Leret, you can see this muscle popping out almost like a tumor. If you wish to specifically practice the pronation movement, you can hold a tool that resembles a hammer with more weight on one end, place your arm on a bench, and then rotate your arm inward. If you are using a dumbbell, you can achieve a similar effect by grasping the handle closer to one end. What about those wrist roller rope or cable winding exercises you see online lately? Are they any good for muscle growth? Even though they're popular, this movement doesn't involve an eccentric contraction. That's because after you contract the muscle to wind it up, there's no phase where the muscle lengthens as it returns to the start. Considering eccentric contraction is crucial for muscle growth, I don't think it's a very effective exercise. Also, these particular wrist rollers involve a lot of reps, which can make it hard to reach the point of muscular failure. In fact, the largest meta-regression analysis shows that when the number of repetitions exceeds 12, people have difficulty gauging their workout intensity, including the point of failure. This is because the number of repetitions becomes too high. So overall, I don't think it's a particularly great movement. Now for the muscles on the back of your arm, the ones involved in wrist extension. First, of course, you need to do wrist extensions. Again, you can rest your hand on a bench or your knee and perform the extension by bending your wrist upward. Similar to before, dumbbells can cause issues with balance and stability, so I personally prefer to use a barbell. Now let's take a quick look at the brachioradialis. Finding workouts difficult? The Progressive Overload coaching app takes care of everything for you. It automatically adjusts the weights and set numbers according to your workout performance and recovery rate, and it even changes the types of exercises as needed. It also has a feature to emphasize specific body parts, and you can adjust the balance between hypertrophy and strength based on your goals. Every exercise comes with a detailed tutorial on proper form and technique, which serves as a significant aid for beginners who are looking to learn various movements. There are multiple routines based on how many days you can work out, and it includes everything from home training to a glute-focused routine. You can experience the effects of one-on-one coaching with just this one app. There's a 10-day free trial, and you can find the usage link in the pinned comment. The brachioradialis muscle's primary function is elbow flexion. Since it cooperates with the biceps in assisting with elbow flexion, it does participate in wrist movements, but it's very probable that sufficient stimulation can be achieved through typical bicep curls. Generally, it's known that to stimulate the brachioradialis, performing hammer curls with a neutral grip or reverse curls with an overhand grip is more effective. The reason for this lies in the biceps leverage. The biceps exhibit optimal leverage and maximal activation when the arm is supinated with an underhand grip. Conversely, elbow flexion leverage diminishes with a neutral grip and further reduces with a reverse grip. EMG studies corroborate this finding. With an underhand grip, palm facing forward, biceps activation increases, but with a neutral or overhand grip, it decreases. So, the argument presented is built on the logic that because the biceps are less engaged during hammer curls or reverse curls, the brachioradialis will conversely be used more. However, if we observe the actual activation of the brachioradialis itself rather than just the biceps leverage or activity, the situation becomes somewhat different. Curiously, 2 studies found increased brachioradialis activation during reverse curls. However, as many as 7 studies reported no difference in activation based on wrist position or that brachioradialis activation increased when using an underhand grip, just like a regular curl. A little strange, don't you think? A significant number of studies suggest that while bicep activation decreases during hammer curls or reverse curls, it doesn't mean brachioradialis activation increases. In fact, they say it might even decrease. Of course, muscle activation doesn't perfectly predict muscle growth and should only be used as an indirect indicator. So, since there are no studies that have actually measured muscle growth in this way, and we're just guessing based on indirect indicators like muscle activation, we can't be 100% sure. But overall, it seems most accurate to think that the brachioradialis is stimulated similarly in all types of curls. Therefore, of course, you can do hammer curls or reverse curls, but it seems unlikely that not doing them will make a big difference. So how often and how many sets of forearm exercises should you do? First, based on scientific evidence, it seems best to stimulate a specific muscle at least twice a week. Even if the total workout volume is the same, slightly better muscle growth is observed when you split that volume into 2 or more sessions. From individual studies to a large-scale meta-regression analysis from 2025, they all say the same thing. The reason lies in muscle protein synthesis. There's a hypothesis that it's better to stimulate muscle protein synthesis multiple times a week. Therefore, I recommend doing separate forearm exercises at least twice a week. You could also do some forearm exercises after your bicep workout, or if your forearm muscles are a significant body part for you, you can do them separately on your regular rest days. Another important fact is that since the forearms are a very small muscle group, they generate very little systemic fatigue. Exercises that utilize your entire body, such as squats or deadlifts, can leave you very exhausted, but a wrist curl won't strain your body much. Therefore, doing them fairly often shouldn't be a major issue in terms of managing fatigue in your overall routine. Doing a full body exercise like deadlifts more than twice a week can be quite burdensome, right? So, if your forearms are a somewhat underdeveloped body part, I believe training them 3 or even 4 times a week won't cause major issues with your routine's programming. So there you have it, a detailed look at how to build your forearms. If there's a specific body part you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments.